Remember the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard trial? It captivated social media, and it also turned YouTubers and TikTokers into ad hoc lawyers. Well, a new Netflix doc tries to capture all of that chaos. Today, what that trial says about the state of social media. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This is Commotion. Okay, I remember just a little bit over a year ago, watching every single minute of that Amber Heard and Johnny Depp trial online. I couldn't help myself. That's the trial where Depp brought a $50 million defamation suit against his ex-wife and actor Amber Heard. And then she countersued him for $100 million. But long before anybody could hear it on a jury, the court of public opinion made up their mind. And they were loudly on Johnny's side. Now, if you don't remember all of those details, don't worry, stick with me. I'm going to fill you in. So Amber wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post, and though she didn't name Johnny specifically, she did describe herself as, quote, a public figure representing domestic abuse. Years earlier, though, she had accused him of abuse during their divorce. So Johnny ends up suing Amber over that op-ed. And it was Depp and his team who pushed for the cameras in the courtroom and the trial to be live streamed.
Can you please tell the jury why you're here today?
Ms. Heard accused me of abuse.
My ex-husband is suing me.
Brutal, cruel.
This is humiliating for any human being to go through.
And all false.
Now, what you just heard is a little bit of the trailer from the new Netflix docuseries called Depp v. Heard. Kat Tenbarge from NBC and culture writer Izzy Ampil are here to help us figure all of this out and talk about it. Thank you both so much for being here. Now, before we get into this, I just want to let listeners know we are getting into some mature content. It may be upsetting, it may be kind of triggering, so just know that before we get into this. Kat, I want to start here with you because there were many different ways to follow this court case. You could watch the live stream like most of us did, but you could also watch all kinds of like TikToks and other live streams on YouTube. There were lawyers, there were men's rights activists. It was really sort of everywhere. It was inescapable. What do you think the intention was in this documentary by bringing all of that stuff together?
Yeah, so I think what we saw with the documentary is that their intention in showing all the different mediums in which people consumed information about this trial, it was sort of to replicate the experience that you might have as just an average viewer getting input from these different sources, as these were the primary ways people did consume information about this.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it worked? Was it effective?
No. No. I thought that it was very ineffective. And the main reason why I felt this way is because the premise of the documentary is that this was a worldwide phenomenon and millions of people consumed information about the trial this way. So basically, this is just repeating the same process that presumably everybody already went through. And so if you had any sort of interest in this trial already, you likely already saw this information. Mm-hmm. And then on the other hand, in repeating the way that people consumed information about this trial, you're also repeating the flaws in how people consumed information about this trial. There was no pushback against any of the misinformation, any of the victim blaming or victim shaming tactics. And in fact, I think if you walked away from just having this documentary as your source of information, you would not know who is the victim and who is the perpetrator in this domestic abuse situation.
Right. So Izzy, this doc already came out in the UK and people were frustrated by exactly what Kat's talking about. But the director, Emma Cooper, said, quote, "People on Twitter assumed I was going to do some kind of feminist pro-Amber polemic. Well, I'm not, am I?" So she's being deliberately, I guess, quote, neutral. What do you think about that choice?
I mean, I think Kat is right on the money in her analysis of this. I mean, I very much had the same reaction and I read Cooper's comments where she says that she doesn't want to rehash this he said, she said from within the trial. Mm-hmm. She wants to focus on investigating sort of the conversation happening around the trial. And I just find that a really unsatisfying answer, because I feel like if you just present, again, without commentary, without additional analysis, without nuance, without pushback, as Kat said, you present exactly the same commentary that we all bore witness to last year. You repeat the same flaws. You repeat this like extremely lopsided commentary that was very much in Johnny Depp's favor from the beginning, as we've been saying. So I feel like you can't choose neutrality without zooming out and providing more context, providing more analysis, because it was already a non-neutral commentary to begin with.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Although I have to say, I can almost see what she was trying to do, because if you understand some of the vitriol coming from that corner, the mass and scope of it is so upsetting. You sort of see, oh, wow, this was never presented fairly on social media in the first place. Now, Kat, you're actually in the docuseries because you covered this story for NBC. In the clip they use, you talk about how YouTubers were catching fire, and people were making mega bucks off of live streaming this trial. Can you just elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, what I saw happen from even before the trial is that this sort of justice for Johnny Depp fandom emerged. And there was a lot of support for Johnny Depp and a lot of antagonism toward Amber Heard, even before the US trial, even before the UK trial. From the outset of their relationship, people were unhappy that this young, relatively unknown, beautiful woman was dating and then marrying their celebrity crush. Mm-hmm. And so from the very beginning, people were antagonistic toward Amber Heard, and they were overwhelmingly Team Johnny. And so when we see these YouTubers come into play during the trial, what they've essentially done is they've already prepared their audience to take Johnny's side. They've already laid out this framework that this is going to be a reputation comeback story. And so the narrative was already really solidly entrenched. And what that meant is that algorithms were already fine-tuned to this idea that if you defended Johnny Depp, your content would be very successful, it would be highly watched, it would be highly engaged with, and you would make a lot of money. There was no such incentive platform for defending Amber Heard. What we actually saw was anyone who did defend Amber Heard was met with harassment, met with doxing. People's accounts were actually reported until they ceased to exist.
Wow. And a lot of Gen Z gets their information from TikTok, so you can imagine how unbalanced and sort of uncomfortable that could have been. You also covered the trial, and you were in competition with fans every day. What was that like?
It was something that I had come to be used to covering YouTube drama. So previously I covered a lot of influencers and I covered a lot of online culture. And what I saw happening with this trial is that those two worlds absolutely converged to the point where this was not so much about getting an objective or a neutral point of view on the situation. In this case, you had essentially a giant pro Johnny Depp fandom attempting to control and sway not only the media narrative that came out during the trial, but also the public perception. And they were very, very successful in those efforts.
Mm-hmm. So, Izzy, we know that Johnny Depp won that defamation case, but so did Amber Heard win one part of her countersuit, the part where she said his former lawyer called her abuse claims, quote, a hoax. But even though she did come out, somewhat a victor, people see Johnny Depp as overwhelmingly the person who won that. Why do you think that is?
I mean, I think for the pro-Johnny camp, they had this really long-running momentum, again, as Kat has already analyzed a little bit for us. And so by the time the verdict rolls around, I think even in the documentary, most of the TikToks and YouTube videos of people reacting live to the verdict and sharing that content online are people who have been anticipating a Johnny victory for a long time. And I think they were so excited to see not even just Johnny Depp as the victor, but themselves as being proven right in this long-running narrative, and themselves as being on the right side of history. I think that very much dominated the pro-Johnny camp. And I think for people who were supporting Amber Heard, it was just exhausting as an ordeal for her and for themselves. Again, not only did Amber Heard receive additional online abuse during the course of this trial, anyone who spoke up in her defense received the same level of death threats and harassment that she did. And so I think by the end, the sense of exhaustion and just sort of fear that percolated among the Amber Heard supporters was just like, okay, we lost. Like, we have suffered enough, like, in the course of this, that the verdict itself doesn't really decide anything for us as her supporters.
Yeah. Izzy, just to follow up to that, like, do you see any moments in the series where Johnny and Amber themselves kind of acknowledge that media circus?
I mean, I think there's the moment where Johnny Depp meets the vlogger from Popcorn Planet. There's the moment where he's sort of hanging out the window, waving adoringly to the crowds who have gathered outside the courtroom. He is sort of subtly acknowledging the power of public opinion in his favor. And I think Amber Heard, in that audio segment where she's taunting Johnny Depp, this is from years ago, and saying if he calls himself a victim of domestic violence, no one will believe him in the media or in the court of public opinion. That piece of audio was something that she was really punished for, because it's sort of gauche to acknowledge that public opinion does sway the outcome of the case. And so you can see Johnny Depp is sort of like pushing that aside, trying not to acknowledge it, because when Amber Heard does acknowledge public opinion, she really gets raked over the coals.
Kat, there's someone in the documentary who says that all of this sort of, uniting with Johnny is pushback towards the Me Too movement. What do you think of that?
I think that's a really interesting perspective, because the way that I see it is we're still watching the Me Too movement unfold. Johnny Depp was one of the people, the allegations against him came out before the Me Too movement really kicked off in late 2017. However, Amber Heard's sort of testimony and her explanation of the relationship was a highly discussed topic during the Me Too movement. So we're not really watching a pushback to the Me Too movement as much as we're watching what happened in the Me Too movement. And I think what a lot of people have yet to really wrap their head around is that in 2017, we encouraged many women to come forward, women against powerful men in the entertainment industry, as well as women from all walks of life, and victims who aren't women from all walks of life. And so we encouraged these people to come forward, but there was no infrastructure for them to receive support, to receive justice. And so what happened to Amber Heard in this trial was the natural conclusion of a movement when we tell people to come forward, but we don't have infrastructure to support them along the way.
So, Kat, we've had some time to reflect on this court case. It's been a bit over a year, as I mentioned off the top. What do you think was missing from this new documentary?
I think the biggest thing missing from this documentary is the crucial context that allows people to understand why this matters and why it had a big impact. Part of the context that I think is absolutely necessary if you're going to do a documentary like this is having experts in the field of domestic violence and victim intervention and support come in and explain, this is what a power dynamic is. This is how abuse works. One of the biggest things missing from this documentary was a straightforward explanation of how abuse works. And this is part of the reason why it had such a devastating effect for people, is because the reaction to this trial and the verdict, it reinforces false and harmful stigmas and stereotypes about victims of abuse. People looked at Amber Heard and said, I don't believe she could be a victim. And if that's the case, then what we're seeing is a widespread lack of support for victims, because her behavior was very in line with how victims of abuse behave. And so I think that in missing that sort of context, you're actually creating a situation where you might be passing along more misinformation to the audience along the way.
Well, thank you both so much. I know that this was a really difficult thing to rewatch and relive, but I really appreciate you both taking the time to chat with me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Kat Tenbarge is a culture and technology reporter at NBC. Izzy Ampil is a freelance culture writer and on the editorial staff at the Paris Review. Depp v. Heard is out on Netflix now. I'm Amil Niazi, sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. You're listening to Commotion. Okay, something radically different from what we were just talking about now, because I'm going to take you back to the mid-2000s. Now, this is before Vanderpump Rules, before Real Housewives, before the Kardashians, when the biggest reality TV show was this.
Put yourself in words unspoken. Live your life with arms wide open. Today is where your book begins. The rest is still unwritten. Yeah.
I'm not going to sing, but I really, really want to. I'm not even a bit ashamed to say I know every word of that song because of The Hills. That was the theme for The Hills, and I never missed an episode. And I know a lot of people didn't. It ran for 6 seasons on MTV between 2006 and 2010. And if you don't know, you can follow me here. It's going to be a little bit twisting and winding, but it was about a group of friends living and working in LA. At the center was Lauren Conrad. But even though she was the star, the pair that really made that show famous, maybe infamous, I should say, were Heidi Montag and Spencer Pratt. Now, Heidi and Spencer were the show's villains. And here's where it gets a little messy. At one point, Lauren blamed Spencer for spreading rumors about her for having a sex tape. Isn't that so 2000s? And since she and Heidi were friends and roommates, okay, she also blamed Heidi for sticking by Spencer, that little rat. And it all led to this iconic scene.
Well, I didn't come here to fight with you. I really didn't. I just came here to say I really am sorry for all that you've been through, and I'm so sorry for things that have happened this way. And
I appreciate that. But the only thing really that there is to do is to forgive and forget. So I really do. I want to forgive you, and I want to forget you.
Okay, I'm sorry, but are there any colder words than I want to forgive you and I want to forget you? Oh, please, no one ever say that to me. Now, Heidi and Spencer have a new podcast, Spidey's 16th Minute, which they have described as a masterclass in being famous. I mean, no one does it like Heidi and Spencer. And here to talk about all this, Jessi Cruickshank. She hosted the Hills After Show along with Dan Levy. It was the show that came on after the Hills, but really it became must-see TV. Hi, Jessi.
Hi, Amil. What a throwback. You have taken me back to like my days sitting on a couch wearing an oversized belt and 700 bangles with hair extensions down to my knees. I'm there.
Those belts were so unnecessary and yet so crucial to the outfit, you know? Like we had to put them on.
Oh, yes.
Okay, for anyone who wasn't there, who didn't see that mascara-stained scene that we just played, can you please explain who were Heidi and Spencer back then?
Listen, for anyone who doesn't know who Heidi and Spencer are, I deeply admire you. I want your life. So
Exactly.
Heidi and Spencer, I mean, you set it up pretty well. They are, I would say now they're career reality stars. So now they're married. They have 2 young kids, but they started dating when they were on the show The Hills. And they really did like lean into that role of villains on the show. I don't think, from my knowledge, I was sort of deeply embedded in that show. I don't think any producer told them to do that. I think Spencer was the mastermind there. He thought, we need our scenes to matter. We don't want to be cut out. We want to be integral parts of the show. So let's play the villains. And like you said it, and just to contextualize, The Hills was a true pop culture phenomenon. I mean, the cast was on the cover of Rolling Stone. That doesn't happen anymore. Heidi was on the cover of Playboy. Heidi and Spencer together were literally on the cover of every Us Weekly, In Touch magazine that came out from like 2008 through 2010. And they really have been trying to hang on to that level of fame ever since.
I know. Oh my God, dark days. You're just taking me back to a grim time. Okay, but the show ended in 2010, okay? And then what have they been doing since?
So I think they've been trying to hang on to relevancy in a sort of fascinating way. I mean, they're trying to be TikTok stars now, Instagram. I think Spencer was selling crystals at one point.
Yes.
Any reality show that has invited them on, they have said yes. Celebrity Big Brother, UK version, US, Marriage Boot Camp. Like, they do whatever they are asked to do. And I don't know if you saw this viral video, Amil, but recently they posted a video that said, if reality stars go on strike, as they are rumored to do alongside SAG and the WGA, they will not be on strike. They say they will be available for all of your needs. You can take advantage of them. You can work them to the bone. They'll be avail. So like, they have a sense of humor about their position in Hollywood now. And then they recently launched this podcast.
Okay, let's talk about the podcast, because it really is like a kind of a mind-boggling look at like what it takes to stay famous, right? Once you get a little sweet taste of that nectar. Here's a clip of Spencer asking Demois, the gossip Instagrammer, why there's no photos posted of a recent trip they took to Hawaii.
I will say I've been feeling very less relevant because I haven't seen anybody submit anything from our trip to Hawaii. We didn't get one
They
submission.
did, but your son is in it.
What? He has his own IG, please.
I know, but I don't post kids.
Yeah.
I don't post kids.
Oh, I'm going to have to tell him to stand out of the way more often. Gunner, you stand in line over there while we get
When
coffee.
mommy and daddy are walking, please just walk over there.
What if we send
Make
in
sure
a,
we can see you.
We'll send in a release.
Okay, I'm a mom of two. I know you're a mom too. There's not even a moment that's ever crossed my mind where I would push my kids out of the way to get into de moi of all things. What do you think about what he's saying there?
First of all, it's incredible. I mean, that's what makes them unique. I can't think of another celebrity or reality star who is so open and has always been open about their desperate need to be famous, because he's joking, but he's absolutely not joking. He's going to push his 5-year-old into the ocean to get them out of those shots, to get into de moi. So I sort of love it. I mean, it feels refreshing in a way, and that's what we've come to expect from them. I also think it's funny that this podcast is positioned as like Heidi and Spencer will teach you how to be famous. From what I've heard, it's just Heidi and Spencer trying to get themselves famous again. You know what I mean?
Yes, 100%. But do you think they'll talk about any of that darker stuff? Like, you know, Heidi had a lot of plastic surgery done. There was a moment in the Hills when her mom sees her new face for the first time and just like doesn't even know what to say. Will they go there?
Yes. I think that nothing will be off limits here. You know, we often talk about this like oversharing culture that's emerged on social media. I think Heidi and Spencer could be credited as starting that. Like, I'm no anthropologist, but these two have had no shame or no filter in the way of social media now since 2006. Like, you know, at 23, she had 10 plastic surgery procedures in a day and did it publicly.
Yeah.
Now you have celebrities, probably getting 10 plastic surgery procedures in a day and pretending it's all natural, which is arguably more problematic. So I'm here for it if they do go into all that. Like, I think that's what's refreshing about them. And I honestly, like, I'm not surprised that they have leaned into this medium, because I don't know how else they're going to make money in 2023, Amil. Like, I do think often that a lot of their co-stars have gone on to huge, you know, businesses in influencing. Lauren Conrad still has this massive clothing collection and retail business. But Heidi and Spencer leaned so hard into that villain role that I don't think they can make real money off of brand partnerships like most former reality stars do now, right? No brand wants to align themselves with Spidey in any real monetary way. So, but they're also famous enough that they can't like go out and get normal jobs. So they have to try ventures like a podcast. And I think they're going to have to be as honest as they can be to keep people listening.
Okay, we can't talk about the Hills and not talk about your iconic show, your after show. So I love watching you and Dan. Honestly, it felt like two friends like goofing around rather than like two serious people making a show. And I say that in truly the most best way, because that's what you want when you are like reacting to a reality show. So talk to me about the vibe of making that show.
It's so funny because we really were, and we were so young. We were like 23, 22. We were best friends. We still are. Like, so there was an element of that. There also was, you know, as a Canadian, you would appreciate, like, we only made that show for Canadian content purposes.
I assumed.
There was nothing else like that. There were no reunion shows. Like, reality show wasn't seen as worthy of an entire show after it to discuss it. But because in Canada, we had to create the same, like, a certain amount of Canadian programming based on the amount of American programming that we aired for every episode of The Hills, our bosses said, okay, we'll just throw Dan and Jessi on to talk about it for 30 minutes, problem solved. Like, the after show was never seen as a show. It was always seen as a solution to a problem. So you can imagine our surprise when, I think it was the first Laguna Beach after show finale, we opened up our doors to a live studio audience. And I'll never forget, Dan and I were like, no one's going to come. There were like 100 chairs laid out, and we were terrified that no one would come to fill them. And by 1:00, police arrived with dogs and barricades because thousands of people were swarming the MTV studio, blocking off Yonge Street, like trying to come to a taping of our show. And that was truly the first moment that Dan and I looked at each other like, I guess people are watching. And that our show became like really the first sort of after show, rewatch show, reunion show that ever existed. So thank you, CanCon.
No,
for creating
thank you,
that
CanCon.
that genre for better or for worse.
And it was the first MTV Canada show that was like simulcast in the States too, right?
Yes, I'm glad you brought this up because no one else in the Canadian television history archives would ever want to admit that the Hills After Show historically is the first show to ever go simulcast live in Canada and the U.S.
That's a really big deal, genuinely.
I guess so. Yes.
Okay, I feel like most people would be like, oh, talking about a reality show, that's my dream job. But like, what is it really like to have to watch reality TV as a job?
It's funny because we never thought of the problem is like people will still come up to me today 15 years later and quote moments from the Hills or ask me about specific scenes and I don't remember anything. And Dan and I recently talked about this on my podcast. Like we don't remember that show because we didn't consume it in the way that a fan would.
Yeah.
We would get early episodes. We would sit down with notepads and like our team, we literally had a team of 4. So to the 2 other people who worked with us, we would watch the episodes and often we'd get the episodes before they were finished. So you would have a producer voiceover in there. Like Heidi would sit down with Lauren and Lauren would say, I can't believe you did that. And a male voice would come on and say like, but you told me not to. I mean, they would create scenes with voiceover in a way that no one knew that we knew. So we weren't like watching it with the love and enjoyment that everybody else was. We really were looking for jokes and we were looking for clips and like your head isn't there like it is when you're just watching something for fun with your friends, you know?
Yeah, no, I've seen some of those early cuts of like Vanderpump Rules. Sometimes I get screeners. And it is so jarring. You're like, okay, this is not the experience I want. I'll just watch it with everyone else.
I know. And you know, we were really like, especially when we were simulcast and airing in the US, we were like part of the machine. So we couldn't tell anyone that some of the fights were fake or that this whole storyline was voiced by a man 2 days ago. Like we had to run with it and you know, pretend that it was all real.
Okay, you met Spidey. You met them, and you have you have a funny story about Tom Cruise that they put on the podcast, but they did not mention you.
I know. I mean, I have stories for days about Spidey.
I bet you do.
The Tom Cruise story is like on their podcast. They mentioned that Tom Cruise gave Spencer advice about whether he should have a big wedding or not with Heidi. Mm-hmm. And what happened is, for whatever reason, Tom Cruise agreed to sit down with Dan and I. He was doing a press tour for his movie Valkyrie, which I don't know if anyone remembers. I had to Google it. And he agreed to an interview with us. And because The Hills was such a phenomenon at the time and we were hosting the after show, we asked him about Heidi and Spencer, which I remember Dan Levy was like horrified that we were going to ask Tom Cruise about that. But I was like, I'll do it. So I asked Tom Cruise if Heidi and Spencer if Spencer should give Heidi the big wedding that she wanted. And Tom Cruise being Tom Cruise, like totally leans in, looks straight into the camera and says something like, Spencer, if Heidi wants the wedding, you got to give her that wedding. You got to give her that big wedding. And that clip went, I mean, viral wasn't the word we were using, but essentially like it was everywhere. Yeah. Heidi and Spencer personally reached out to me to say like, my God, thank you for telling Tom Cruise who we are. And that was a big moment because it's sort of like if Tom Cruise is acknowledging your show and the villains on the show and the plot lines of the show, then the show has made it, you know?
Yeah, you're a big deal. Okay, quickly.
You're a big deal.
Tell us about me actually meeting these two. Like, what was it like? What are they like up close and personal?
I have met them on so many occasions. My favorite time being with Heidi and Spencer. I mean, we could sit here for 4 hours and I could
would.
tell you
I genuinely
stories that
would.
you would not believe, Amil. You'd be like, no. So my favorite story is Heidi. Do you remember her music career?
Of course I do. Absolutely.
Okay, Blackout. I mean, they're still using one of her songs as the theme song for their new podcast, which I love. So when she was at the peak of her music career, she performed a single on the Miss Universe pageant. Like, this was where we were at. And so I flew down to the Bahamas to go cover this momentous occasion. And we had a few, pre-organized interviews, and then we were done. And I watched the performance and bumped into them after. It's like midnight after the show. And they say, oh, we're going out. We have an after party. Come. So I say goodnight to my camera crew, my producers. I go meet them at the after party. Now it's like 1:30, almost 2 a.m. There are shots everywhere. Everyone's drinking. It's a nightclub. I say, hey, guys. They say, hey, Jessi, where are your cameras? And I was like, wait, what? I thought you invited me to your party. You're drinking. And they were like, no, we want your cameras.
Wow.
So I had to go wake up my camera crew at 2 a.m., bring them back, and suddenly they were on. I mean, Heidi was doing lap dances, shots, like they were performing for my cameras at 2, 3 in the morning at their after party. And that's the moment I realized, like, these aren't regular human beings who turn it on for a show. These are lifelong reality stars who don't know how to function without the cameras.
That's actually so scary. Like what you've just told, like a horror story. That I don't think I'll soon forget. Jessi, I really could talk to you forever about this.
I know,
but thank you. I
know.
appreciate you. I appreciate you going back to this like strange time in history with me. Thank you so much.
Hey, it's an honor. It's a joy. Thank you. Anytime.
Jessi Cruickshank is a comedian and host of the comedy podcast Phone a Friend with Jessi Cruickshank. And that's it for the show today. I'm Amil Niazi sitting in for Elamin Abdelmahmoud. Thank you so much for listening to Commotion.